up here. She's a leader of the BWC's Chittenden County Organizing Committee and our Media Committee, and she's going to help introduce our next speaker.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Hello, my name is Denise Rixie. I live in Essex Junction, Vermont, and I am a proud member of the Vermont Workers Center. In a booklet presented to the commissioners of the United Nations in 1958, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold these rights close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. The powerful ideas conveyed by these wise words drive the work of the Vermont Workers Center and the Put People First campaign. Every day here in Vermont, people are struggling to meet their fundamental needs and rights to safe, affordable housing, education, healthy food, a healthy environment, work with dignity, and a livable wage. We have the incredible fortune to be represented by a leader and a rare politician who is driven by the same commitment to economic and social human rights. From Mayor of Burlington to the U.S. House of Representatives to the U.S. Senate, he has been a fighter for the working class families, for unions, for veterans, for Vermont farmers, for renters, for low-wage and unemployed workers, and has been a powerful support to the Workers' Center. Decades before the Occupy movement, he was an outspoken critic of corporate greed and the growing gap between the wealthiest American and the rest of us. We are grateful to have such an honorable and compassionate man to represent and inspire the people of Vermont. This Human Rights Day, it is with great honor that I present to you Senator Bernie Sanders.
Denise, thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. And let me thank the students at UVM and the Vermont Workers Center, not only for helping to organize this important event, but for the work that the Workers Center has been doing year after year after year. At the end of the day, the way we change society, frankly, is not going to take place in Washington or even in Montpelier. It's going to take place at the grassroots level by educating, by organizing, by getting working people, low-income people, people who are alienated from the political process to stand up and fight for their rights. And that is what the Vermont Workers Center has been doing for years. Thank you very much. I was thinking about your topic today, not only the people's budget, I'll say a word on that, but the issue of human rights. And I really applaud you for bringing that issue out on the floor, because frankly, Well, it's an issue that I, in Washington, deal with every single day in one context or another, and you deal with. It's an issue we really don't lay on the table and kind of talk about. What do we mean about human rights? What is human rights? And I was just thinking, before I came here, about putting that into a little bit of an historical context, because it's important that we do that. And I was thinking that when we think about human rights 150 years ago, which is, frankly, from a human historical perspective, not a very long period of time. 150 years ago in this country, if your color of your skin was a bit darker than mine, you were held in slavery. You were nothing more than a piece of property. You could be bought and sold like a horse or a cow. That was human rights in America 150 years ago. Not a long time ago. 100 years ago. If you were in Europe or in Russia, what human rights was about was a belief almost universally accepted, is that if you were the Tsar, you were the king, you were the Archduke, God had anointed you to that position. And you had unlimited wealth, you had unlimited power. God had ordained that. And at the same time, if you were a peasant, if you were a worker, God had also said that your life was to be lowly, no power, economic misery, because God had ordained that. That was human rights back then. 90 years ago, in the United States of America, a country ostensibly founded on democratic principles, if you were a woman, what human rights meant is you didn't have the right to vote. And in your relationship with your husband, you are in every respect a second-class citizen. 80 years ago, some of our grandparents are alive. 80 years ago, if you were a worker being exploited on the job, and you wanted to come together with your fellow workers to form a union, to engage in collective bargaining so you could earn a decent wage and have decent working conditions, you were not guaranteed that right 80 years ago. 10 years ago, if you happened to love somebody who was of the same gender as you were, you had virtually no rights at all in the United States of America. So my point, and we could give many other examples about that, my point is that human rights is an evolving concept. And what we have got to do is to stake our claim as clearly as we can what human rights is about. So that 100 years from now, when people look back on this period, they will say, thank you for leading America and the world in a very different direction. Let me just say a few words about what's going on now. My view of human rights. First of all, a very fundamental and basic human right is democracy. Democracy. And democracy means a lot more than just the right to vote every 2 years or every 4 years. And I want all of you to be aware that right now, in this country today, there are governors and legislatures working overtime trying to suppress the right of people to participate in the political process. They're saying to the old, they're saying to the young college students, they're saying to people of color, you need a photo ID, and if you don't have one, you don't own a car, you don't have a driver's license, it's going to be pretty difficult for you to vote. Going on right now. In terms of the political process, 2 years ago, by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court of the United States of America came up with a remarkable discovery that corporations are people. That ExxonMobil and Bank of America are just like you and me. Sit down and have dinner, have a beer with Bank of America. And because they are flesh and blood human beings, they are entitled to First Amendment constitutional rights, which give them the ability today to pour hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars without disclosure into political advertising all over this country. That, to my mind, is not what democracy is about, which, by the way, is why we have just brought forth, introduced a constitutional amendment to end citizenship. And when we talk about human rights, the day will come, sooner than later, when people will look back on disbelief and say that in America we tolerated the kind of income and wealth disparity which currently exists. People will look back and say, I cannot believe that in America, in the year 2011, you had the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world, but you also had the top 1% earning more income than the bottom 50%. I can't believe that you allowed a situation to exist where the top 400 wealthiest people in America own more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million Americans. What were you thinking about when you allowed that to occur? So human rights, when we talk about it from a democratic perspective, what we are saying very simply is that everybody in our country, and hopefully everybody in the world, will at least be able to have a minimum standard of living, a decent job and a living wage, a decent house, decent educational opportunity for our kids. That is a human right. And clearly right now, in this state, we are engaged in a great struggle. And if we succeed, in my view, it will have a profound impact on our entire country. And that is what we say when we talk about human rights, is that health care is a human right and not a privilege. Coming weeks and months, we are all going to do everything that we possibly can to see that Vermont leads this nation into a Medicare for all single-payer program guaranteeing health care to all of our people. And when we talk about human rights are not going to mean anything on Earth if we do not have a planet that is habitable.
Thank you very much.
If we do not reverse in a very significant way global warming by ending our dependence on fossil fuel and moving aggressively to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. There will not be human rights if people live in circumstances where floods occur every year, where people live in areas where there is drought, where you can't grow food, where there are severe weather disturbances. So to me, what a human right is and what an economic right is transforming our energy system, creating millions of good-paying jobs, and moving away from the kind of pollution that fossil fuel provides. For thousands of years, there have been people who had the vision of trying to turn pitchforks into plows, trying to cut back on military spending, cut back on enmity, cut back on war, and create a peaceful world. And sadly and tragically, we still have a very, very long way to go. At a time when the United States, at this moment, has more people living in poverty than at any time in our history, I must report to you that we are now spending more money on the military than the rest of the world combined, 3 times what we spent in 1997. We've got to cut back on military spending and make sure that our people survive economically. In terms of the people's budget, and I applaud you very much for raising that issue, for educating people about that issue, here is the story. Right now, this country has a $1.3 trillion deficit. And let me tell you as clearly as I can how that deficit came about. It surely did not come about because we are spending too much on our children or our elderly. It came about because we are engaged in 2 wars and Bush forgot to pay for them. Trillions of dollars on those wars. It came about that despite the fact we have the most unequal level of income and wealth distribution of any country on earth, Bush and his friends gave huge amounts of tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country. It came about because we are now in a major recession, and when you're in a recession with massive unemployment, with small businesses going on, the less revenue comes in. And let us never forget that this is a recession caused by the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street, which we have got to address. So the fight right now, in terms of a budget, is very clear. Number one, when the wealthiest people in this country have never had it so good, when their effective, i.e. their real tax rates are the lowest in decades, the wealthiest people in this country are going to have to start paying their fair share of taxes. My office a few months ago provided a list of one major corporation after another that in some cases made billions of dollars in profits and did not pay a nickel in federal corporate taxes. We've got to end the outrageous loopholes that exist for corporations in this country and make sure that they start paying their fair share of taxes. But the other thing that we have got to do, especially in the midst of this terrible, terrible recession, where real unemployment is 16%, where so many people are just hanging on by their fingernails, is we must not cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We have got to make sure that we extend unemployment insurance, and we've got to make sure that we end the disgrace right now of 50 million people not having health insurance. Let me just conclude by saying this. These are tough times economically in this country, the worst times since the Great Depression. Politically, these are enormously difficult times. We have an extreme right-wing leadership controlling the U.S. House of Representatives. Many of us, frankly, are disappointed that Obama has not been more progressive than he has been. But I will give you some good news. I'll give you some good news. Bank of America a few months ago decided they wanted to charge people a $5 fee on their debit cards. You know who turned them around? Not Congress, the American people. A couple of weeks ago in Ohio, the people of that state stood up and said, you know what, you're not going to take away collective bargaining rights of public employees. They want the latest. In Wisconsin, a little before that, they defeated by a recall, two Republican right-wing senators. Not a bad performance. So I think that the momentum is with us. More and more Americans understand that something is fundamentally wrong when the middle class is collapsing, poverty is increasing, and the gap between the rich and everybody else is growing wider. What we in our state have got to take the responsibility for is leading the nation in making the changes that have to be made. I want to see the other 49 states look to Vermont and say, thank you, Vermont, for leading this nation in a very different direction. Thank you all.